Welcome to this episode of Thrive with Our Three, where we had a fantastic conversation with Lucy Henry, the Vice President of Business Development with First Sun EAP.
We spoke with Lucy about the importance of having an EAP program in place, how that can help your workplace, what kind of resources it can leverage and bring to bear to support your leaders and your employees, and how that can foster well-being and psychological resilience across your entire workforce.
Whether you're a leader or an employee, there's lots of grateful tips inside. Enjoy! All right, well, joining us today, we have Lucy Henry, who is the Vice President of Business Development from First Sun EAP. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lucy. So, Lucy, why don't you kick us off by giving us a little background of your professional journey and, your role at First Sun EAP?
I have been now at First Sun EAP for April will be 24 years. I started out as a clinician, as a provider for First Sun, and then came on and was doing some account management and training, and I have supervised intake, and I have done risk management. I've always done a lot of kind of crisis response, disruptive event stuff, but I have moved into a kind of business development role over the last almost 10 years now, but still kind of pinch hitting to do, whatever needs to be done. So I'll be doing intake one day and doing a disruptive event the next day. And still trying to bring some business to First Sun. But I, fell in love with the work of employee assistance really back in the early 90s when I went to work in my first EA job. And back then when I went to work for First Sun, got very involved with the Employee Assistance Professionals Association. So was able to be president of that organization 2014 to 2016. And that's an organization that's changed a lot as well, but still just trying to beat the as I say, I preach the gospel of EAP these days.
I love that.
Yeah, and I'm going to have George dive into his question, but really just teeing off that question, the world of the EAP has changed a little bit in, over the last few years. I know George has a great question to ask you in regards to that.
Well, Jamie is reading my mind once again, and I'm going to go off script already. And Jamie, hopefully don't get mad at me for this.
Never.
I know you've been kind of in the game, Lucy, and you and I go way back quite a bit. Since the 90s, how do you see the EAP industry evolving in that time? It's a pretty big question. But
yeah, especially since the 90s. I mean, managed care came in the 90s, and that changed a lot of, where EAPs were internal to a lot of, large organizations, that they became much more associated with insurance as well as with even ancillary different benefits. So it became a benefit consultants addition to the whatever you want to call all the benefits for a workplace, rather than the workplace saying we want an EAP to really help our employees. It's kind of almost a lost leader. So for some people, so like every life insurance company and even dental has EAP in it. So, but we really ask people, what do you really have when you have those EAPs? So you have those core EAPs that are really still trying to say, we are not part of an embedded product, or if you're part of an embedded product, we're really trying to make sure that the companies know what they have and using them. But now it's become the digital solutions and the video solutions. So you've got a lot of the bigger players out there that are trying to get into the bigger corporations. And, how are they really helping the workplace? And for me, it always comes back down to, if you have an EAP, how are they engaging with your workplace and helping your workplace be better, as well as helping your employees? That it's more than just employee counseling and other services. It is about mental health, but it's about the health, first and foremost, of that workplace.
I hear what you're saying. It's really about the overall well-being of the culture. Fast forwarding, we've seen just in the past few years, the pandemic impacting all of us with COVID, and how much that changed the landscape of the workforce and how it changed the landscape of managing people, leaders understanding what their people are dealing with. So my question is, how have employee assistance programs, or EAPs, evolved in response to the unique challenges that remote or hybrid work kind of thrust upon us just a short few years ago?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things is, I mean, folks are much more comfortable doing, video or even text-based messaging counseling versus going and actually sitting down with a counselor. So people are more comfortable. I mean, the world of Zoom and Teams and whatever we're doing now, that is an everyday thing. So people are having to. With the pandemic, they really had to learn how to use that kind of technology. But one of the things that I'm also finding is that people want to see people face to face. I mean, there is a generation, and there are people that are fine doing video and virtual counseling because they don't have to get in their car and get in traffic and have to drive somewhere. But then there are other people that feel like the only way they can get help is by being with somebody else in person.
We've seen that as well. Like, certainly the pandemic has accelerated the adoption of telehealth across the board on the one hand. And as you noted, Lucy, when it's, and Jamie and I have talked about this as well, and when it's convenient and when there's a good clinical match and there's a good reason to use that, it's extremely helpful, and it gives access to people that otherwise have not had access to treatment. The flip side is, I was even surprised. And what's funny is I have actually run a telehealth company for 20 years now. And I've been trying to get hospitals to adopt telehealth, and they didn't really at scale until the pandemic. And yet we are still seeing that people want that personal, in-person kind of physical interaction. There still is something very powerful about helping people grow and work through things in a personal space. Jamie?
Yeah, no, I would actually agree with that, because there's just something about personal interaction and kind of feeling like you're amongst others. I mean, I'm an extrovert, so I thrive in those, being amongst people. Teams is great, and I can, channel some of that energy, but there is just something different when you're in a room full of people that you can interact with. And especially in a counseling session, I can imagine, if you feel more of that, I'm imagining that you would feel more of that, like, compassion coming through. There's like a caring factor when you've got somebody sitting across from you. It's not just somebody on screen. They become real when you're in person with them, which you don't always get that from a Teams experience.
For sure. Absolutely. And Lucy, were you going to say something? Sorry, I didn't want to.
Yeah, I was just going to agree. I mean, because, as a clinician, it's one of those, I mean, I know a lot of clinicians that have basically said, I'm not going back to in-person, I'm going to stay video. But for me, it's just, I think there's just so much to be said about holding space and sacred space with somebody in person. And when you can actually kind of be there and feel that energy that's there.
I love that you share that. I've been forced to rethink myself around, there's one layer of therapy, which is about skills, learning a skill, learning skills training, learning to do pain management, learning to do anxiety management. And in some cases that can be distilled or conveyed through telehealth. In some cases that could be distilled in an app, right? Learning a skill base. And then there's the aspect of therapy that is about human connection. And there's a reason from a psychological evolutionary angle that we have been, that we attach and we detach to other humans throughout the lifespan. And we've been doing that in our modern form for at least 70,000 years. And I think what you're hinting at is that is a really powerful thing. And I'm glad we're kind of covering that.
Yeah, you feel it when you go into the office, right? It's a different feeling than when you're working from home solo. Yeah. Right.
Well, and one other quick thing, when the pandemic hit, I think many of us, and I'm guilty of this, to use the word guilty, enjoyed the forced retreat back into home. And after about 6 to 12, and maybe it took some of us a little longer, that got old. And we wanted to bump into people in the grocery store and have fire pits and go back to the Friday night football game and have that human interaction. And that's what we're seeing.
So looking at, kind of what we were just talking about, in terms of, this shift in workplaces going more remote or hybrid, what we've seen or heard is that it kind of limits like a leader or a manager being able to identify proactively that an employee might be struggling. So what role do EAPs play in promoting proactive mental wellness initiatives rather than just reactive support for employees experiencing a crisis or difficulty? So what kinds of things has the EAP evolved in how you support workplaces in helping with that proactivity so that those employees aren't, feeling like they have to navigate that alone or hide it?
Again, and I think a lot of it is, really, instructing and encouraging managers, supervisors, and even HR to make sure that you're paying attention to the employees, even if they're, away, because people are struggling. And pay attention to the little things that you may have, just kind of swept under the rug, so to speak, before the pandemic. But, things that are said, whether they're showing up on time, how they're interacting with others. If you've got a huge team and is there somebody that's, just not interacting with other employees, but also, are things what is their production looking like? We have to really pay attention to productivity. Because I know a couple of years ago it was all the whole thing about quiet quitting. At EAP we've always talked about presenteeism, where folks are at work but really not getting the job done. And the quiet quitting was, folks are just there, but they're really just not engaged at all. So just really having to educate and encourage leaders to engage with everybody on their team on a regular basis, which it can be hard if folks are really managing large teams. But to have, team leads and check-ins and, just having people be aware that, we know you're out there, we know you're, really struggling, but also these are the resources. If you have a strong EAP, to be able to really, say these are the things that you can utilize. This is, something that the EAP has going on this month. But to really publicize that and to let employees know that there's help out there, and many different resources. It's not just about counseling. It could be taking a class or watching a webinar or even just taking an assessment, or utilizing a financial service. So many different ways of being able to engage, that can help the mental health of employees.
Okay. It's almost like you have to be really intentional as a leader to take that, even a small step of extra time to check in with those employees, especially if you see that change in behavior.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. And what's interesting is the landscape has changed at the back end of the pandemic in that I frame it this way. It has forced us to rethink what it means to have work-life integration, or if you want to call it work-life balance. And that equation has come out differently than it was pre-pandemic in terms of where a lot of people and a lot of the workforce finds that balance. I heard a quote recently. I'm going to try not to butcher it. When an employee does not feel supported and recognized or appreciated in the space that they're working, they become a version of an employee that they can give you and still survive. And you are not going to like that employee, which is kind of quiet quitting in a way. And that just really struck me is, as a leader in my own organization, I try to ask the question, and sometimes I fail, but I try to be mindful, and to your point, Jamie, intentional, on really not just focusing on, well, my team isn't being productive. One of my team members is slouching off this week or this month. What the heck's wrong with them? What am I doing as a manager that may not be giving them what they need? And what do I need to do to help them to find what that is, be intentional about it, and help support them in a way?
That's all about leadership development.
Right.
Yes. Can you say more about that and maybe ways that you, First Sun EAPs, help in that realm as well? Because you said earlier, it's not all about counseling, which is a beautiful point.
Right.
Can you talk a little more about that?
One of the things that First Sun, has is a very strong training and leadership development division, that, we do, what we call our first time leaders or a new leader, kind of workshops, or, it's a series of trainings, but really training those folks, in leadership to look at leadership differently. And, so much of leadership really is about empathy. It's, the old school of you got to do this and it's because I said so, that doesn't carry weight anymore. Because folks will quit. They're not going to work for that kind of a manager, that kind of a leader. But to be able to develop connection, but also have boundaries. So you have expectations and you're holding employees accountable, but you're also being empathetic to the fact that everybody has something going on at sometimes in their life, and it may impact the way they do their job. And you don't give them slack because of that, but you at least have understanding, and you work with them to be able to get the job done, but also to care for themselves and their family members. I mean, we know that more and more employees are having to deal with older adults and caring for older adults as well as dealing with children. I mean, we've always used to call that the sandwich generation, but I've certainly seen it a whole lot, is that we're dealing with, employees that are dealing with parents who are aging but are also sick or have terminal diagnoses, things like dementia. And then they're also dealing with, students and kids at home. So the struggle is there. And, just to really learn how to balance that. But also knowing that if they have an EAP, the EAP can help them with those resources. So I think I've moved away from teaching leaders, but some of that is educating, those leaders on the EAP, but also helping them to grow as leaders too.
No, I thought that was spot on, Lucy. And what's interesting about that sandwich generation is most of the time employees are hit in that sandwich at their most productive earning years. So they have immense stress and pressures at the workplace to produce. If they're not at a senior leadership level, they're trying to get there. So there's just multiple stressors that are hitting, and it's helpful to know that EAPs also have kind of managerial supports, resources for folks.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I mean, I still think of, a top tier EAP is going to begin with that, really supporting the leaders of an organization as well as the entire organization. And then reaching down into helping employees. But you've got to help those leaders grow and know how to best do their jobs.
Well, and that's one thing we saw at R3 over the years. A number of years ago, we provided a lot of crisis response, in response to traumatic and disruptive events at the workplace, a lot of evaluations. But what we began to see is, even though we could provide all those support services, leaders were really struggling. And they were struggling not only with their own mental and psychological wellness and well-being, but as well as, how do I help my people? There's no guidebook on how to do this. And as a result of that, a number of years ago, we launched, and we've now scaled and expanded our leadership support, counseling, and coaching services. And that's been so important, to your point, Lucy.
Yeah, because they model the behavior that they want to expect from their employees. Employees are going to be watching them. And so if you've got a leader who's more transparent or open about their own struggles, it allows employees to feel like they can be transparent and open as well. Yeah. So it creates kind of that safe space where I know myself with my employees, I find this level of leadership, where I've gotten to understanding that transparency, but also being very intentional with the empathy, like you stated, Lucy. It's a different dynamic working relationship. You can actually lead better when you understand your people at that level and they understand you. It becomes like a different working relationship overall.
Right.
And it's incredible. I mean, if I think back to my earlier years as a manager to now, it's not, it's like almost night and day in terms of how they interact with you as a leader, when you just have a different approach to navigating that. Right. And then, for leaders, that gap in getting help, helping them to know it's okay and not having to feel like you're superhuman.
Destigmatizing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lucy.
I was going to say, again, it goes a long way when leaders are transparent and vulnerable. I mean, you want to set your boundaries, but you need to know that leaders are human, and we, have struggles, but that allows us to be more empathetic to those employees.
Yeah. Well,
there's going to be a higher level of connection.
Absolutely. And I think too, with some employees, if they're junior in their careers, they might be looking to you as, I want to be you someday. And so what you model helps to develop them as leaders someday. You're kind of almost, it's like, and I hate to compare leadership to parenting, but there's so many similarities I've found as I've become a parent that I'm developing the future professionals and leaders of the world, just like, the future humans of the world when you have kids. So similar concepts, but yeah, it's definitely interesting in comparing the two.
Yeah, I'd agree 100%. And the empathy piece to me is so important. I heard a colleague say a couple of years back at a conference that there's a difference between being nice and being kind. And one of the difficulties is as leaders or managers who are so focused on being nice, which is often in conjunction with being liked, are often not that effective. What they're not doing, as Lucy, you were saying, they're not holding a space of empathy while also holding people accountable, which is a really important combination that you highlighted. But being kind, I could give you really direct, very strong critique feedback, but do it in a kind way, where I'm still respecting you. I'm taking care of your dignity. I'm taking care of the, in a way, your ego, right? So nice versus kind, I find was a really interesting distinction along those lines as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
All
very
right.
much
So
yeah.
let me jump to the next question. How does First Sun EAP, and often in collaboration with vendors like R3, because we work very closely together, how do we ensure together a seamless transition for employees from the initial identification of mental health issues all the way to accessing appropriate resources and support? How do you ensure that that's a seamless transition? And I ask that, Lucy, because so often employees that finally raise their hand and say, I need help, they may not be familiar with mental health services. It's a scary thing. Curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think, it comes down to basic communication, and really, sometimes you just have got to line it out and explain, we're working with a service here, but this is a service here. And, if you want help, so much of it is just being able to say, I need help, and allowing somebody to guide you. I think so much about EAP is really in terms of, and as well as R3 too, is that you're shepherding in so many ways. You're trying to help people get what they need, but they've got to figure it out for themselves too. But sometimes it's just leading them to that right resource. And then given the psychoeducation, if you want to use that terminology, of, okay, you seem to be struggling. It's, at least with EAP, we're not necessarily diagnosing things, but at least being able to say, you've experienced this event in your life. You are likely to be experiencing these kinds of feelings or symptoms, and normalizing that for them. And just to be able to communicate that all the way through, as well as being able to say, okay, I'm going to refer you to this resource. They can help you with something or other, that you need, but also always being that lifeline back. If you need help, then get back to me.
Yeah. And I think, thinking about that, kind of guiding them, when somebody's ready to make that decision of getting help, making it as easy as possible of a process for them is going to make it more likely that they receive that help. Because if you make it too complex, then it feels like it's effort. And it might have been effort alone just to do that first reach out. So, creating, resources that help kind of guide them once they're involved in that is so key.
Yeah. And the education piece as well around what is coaching, what is counseling.
Yeah, what's the difference?
To this day, I still have people that will approach me both at work and even in my personal life and be open. They're kind of I call it circling the drain in terms of being open to going into counseling. And I still occasionally get questions of, are they going to talk about my mother and father and how they treated me when I was 3. I'm like, no, you're 55. You have panic attacks. Like there's not that may not at some point down the road come up if it needs to, but no, we are not in that old Freudian model, right? And the bias that people often have, because their understanding of what counseling is, comes from watching TV or watching HBO, right? So it's interesting that education piece is so important on the front end.
Well, I think there's some cliches. Go ahead, Lucy.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
As I say, I think there's some cliches when you think of counseling. And I say that as a marketer. If I'm working with, sometimes working with a different marketing firms, I always find it interesting their take on the counseling. There's somebody on a couch laying down, their hand is over their head, and a guy's with a clipboard writing notes. In reality, that's not really how it goes to a certain degree. But that's the vision that people get because of how the media has portrayed counseling. So I'd be interested from your perspective, since, there'll be leaders listening to this podcast. I think it'd be great to kind of get a take from you, Lucy, of what would somebody need to expect if they were seeking EAP services like that? What is it like? And I think that might help to break down some of the fear that goes with it too, that some might have in doing that reach out. What from your take, what would an employee or a leader expect if they're making an outreach like that to an EAP?
Well, I think the first thing is that, the first step in any of this, whether it's coaching or counseling or spiritual care, it's about doing an assessment and really getting to know the individual who is reaching out for help, and to really kind of understand where they're coming from, what is their perspective, but also, what do they think they need for themselves? Problems have become much more complex through the years. EAP started out really as just assessment and referral to outside resources, to whereas now they really are, so many EAPs really are behavioral health services without diagnoses, so to speak. And folks are looking to their EAP to be able to do the counseling and, even to do certain techniques. We have people reaching out that want somebody to do EMDR. And we want to say that's really not within the scope of EAP. But people want to use their EAP just like their behavioral health benefits and get mad when you say, well, that's not something we can do. I can't necessarily get you to an eating disorder specialist because that's something that's covered in your medical plan. But they were like, well, I want my free sessions. I want to be able to do it this way. So, the people are defining what EAP really is, but also being able to say, just to be able to say, it's really just about having a conversation with somebody. And it's not necessarily anybody's not necessarily going to judge you, or they're not going to say, well, you're depressed and you need to be able to take this medication, or you're anxious and you need to go, through certain techniques and stuff. But for folks to really understand themselves. I like to think of counseling and or coaching as really, it's learning how to dance with ourselves in so many ways. We may dance around problems, but we really learn to embrace what it is that's going on in our lives, and that's part of who we are, and it's part of our own makeup. When we have pain and suffering in our lives, that has an impact on everything that we do. Just like if we have a broken arm, we're going to get a cast, possibly, and it's going to take time to heal and be able to have therapy. In the same way, if somebody's brain is broken, so to speak, they're really struggling with a mental health issue, there's techniques and there's therapies that can help with that. But it doesn't have to be scary. It's really just allowing yourself to have that conversation with somebody, and to come to terms as you listen to yourself and learn to, again, embrace ourselves and our own pain and woundedness to become healthier and to find healing.
I absolutely love the dance with ourselves metaphor. I think that is so important to frame it that way. It was funny, before that, I wrote down, because with my ADHD brain, full disclosure, I've got to write things down or I'm going to lose them real quickly. Counseling is like strength training. And what's interesting, and Jamie and I have this conversation often, If I told you I was writing a book on physical health and I asked you all, what would that be about? You would say, oh, it'd be about nutrition and working out and strength training and good cardio and meditation and cold plunges or any number of things. And if I said, well, now I'm writing a book on physical illness, what would that be about? You would say, oh, diabetes and cancer and heart disease. But when we talk about mental health, most of us think about anxiety and depression and bipolar disorder and substance abuse and suicidal thoughts. And instead of thinking about it as mental health is something we're all vested in. We're all on a continuum of mental health. To some degree, we're navigating that better or worse. And that's different than mental illness. And to Lucy's point, that dancing with ourselves and learning to do that is so important, and learning to grow and strengthen our ability in that realm is such a critical way of thinking of it.
Yeah, I love that. It was very beautifully stated. Just very touching the way you put that into perspective. I think a lot of times we're doing that ourselves. And to your point, when you're talking to somebody, sometimes you just get to that point where you need kind of almost like, if I want to lose, weight, I'm going to go try to find a personal trainer. A counselor could be seen as like a mental personal trainer, and helping you to navigate how you're feeling. And I think sometimes even just being told what you're experiencing, others have experienced it too. And you're not wrong in how you feel. This is natural. And you should feel that way. And here's how I can help you to try to get through that. I mean, just sometimes having somebody validate your feelings can be therapeutic in and of itself. If you're navigating something that you're, struggling to get through, it can be so powerful.
Very much so. Very much so.
But,
Well, and, to talk a little bit about coaching versus counseling, because more and more people are saying, I think I feel more comfortable seeing a coach. And, so much about coaching is really forward thinking. It's it may have some, you're looking at, okay, I may be this way because of something that happened in my past, but I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on getting stronger. I want to focus on finding ways to achieve the goals that I want to do. Just as if we're training for a marathon or a triathlon or whatever, we're going to have a coach. In the same way, when we're trying to strengthen our brains, we have that coach. And so much of that really is about challenging the way we look at things, and the way we process things.
Yeah. Good distinction.
Yeah, great. So I know you were touching on resources that the EAP had. You made a note of that, about going kind of back to that, to kind of, finish off the conversation and talking about what are some of the resources, or maybe some of the new resources that like First Sun EAP have, incorporated into their service suite to help support kind of this modern day workplace, if you will.
Well, I think one of the first things is, we're actually working with Credible Minds to have some assessments on our website that folks can actually take an assessment and then be directed to certain resources. And it might be that you read something or you take a class, or it might say, I think you could really benefit by coaching or counseling. So that's one of the resources. Another resource that we work with alongside Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina is to be able to offer their members that also have First Sun EAP is Maru Health, which is a 12-week cognitive-based mindfulness therapy. So it's got some biofeedback, but it's a 12-week lessons with mindfulness that go along with really trying to look at anxiety, depression, and burnout. So being able to use those resources, as well as pointing folks to, some of their resources within their health plans, because so many health plans might have something like eMindful or Calm. I know one workplace that we work with is actually providing the Calm app to all its employees. So helping the counselors as well as our First Sun folks to be able to say, okay, this person from this place is calling. Are they utilizing that app? And it's to be used in conjunction with if they wanted to see a coach or a counselor. But also, that's being said, it's no longer just about having clinically trained counselors, but bringing in coaches to work with our employees, or bringing in, we work with the workplace chaplain. So if folks have a need for spiritual care, to be able to talk to a chaplain that is like a hospital-based chaplain, just to discuss those kinds of, again, spiritual care needs. And then just also looking at outside resources within folks' communities and being able to see what else is out there. Is there a grief group if somebody's dealing with grief? So yes, you can see a counselor, but maybe there's a grief group. Maybe it's an online grief group. I know that David Kessler's grief.com has a lot of online grief groups, so being able to point people there. So just knowing that there's lots of resources, that EAP is not just about kind of a one and done, I'm going to go see a counselor, I'm going to get a referral to, elder care or child care or legal. But we can put a lot of things together. So having that prescription, so to speak, of, okay, let's get you with a counselor, but maybe you want to do, ABC as well, to be able to, again, learn to dance with yourself.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing as an overall theme, Lucy, is it really is about having kind of a range of resources so you can get the right service to the right person at the right time.
Exactly.
And what we know about change, human change, whether it's coaching, whether it's sports coaching, whether it's life coaching or executive coaching, of which I do some coaching and I'm a clinician. And those hats, I got to be careful between the two sometimes, is, people are not always equally ready for change. Mm-hmm. We are ready for change at different times and at different trajectories and different intensity levels. Mm-hmm. So I love how you laid out those resources. Yeah. Let me ask a quick follow-up question, and then I think we're probably going to kind of be wrapping up. You mentioned, and I jumped on it, and we got a little bit away from it, is the explosion, if you will, that's my term, of digital and video solutions. And there are people that are extremely bullish on that's going to do away with coaching, interpersonal coaching and therapy. And there's other people that are absolutely very reactive and say that those are terrible. We shouldn't be using them at all. I'm curious, you've been in the industry a long time. You're at a senior leadership, very high leadership level. What's your take on the digital solutions that are out there and how First Sun approaches utilizing those in your overall array of services?
Well, there are a lot of digital solutions, and my whole thing is, I want to see them vetted. I want to see other people using them. I want to see how it's working for them. That's the beauty of being in a group like the National Behavioral Consortium, NBC, is that folks can say, well, I've used this, and this is what I think of it. But so to have those vetted resources, I think they're great ancillary tools. I don't think they are a replacement for what a true EAP needs to be to the workplace. That we work within those things. And again, you've got to kind of see, are they vetted? I remember, we talk about AI, but 10, 12 years ago even, one of the vendors at EAPA, and it was an AI type thing that, again, didn't have what an AI counselor would have now. But we also have to, couldn't even answer, okay, I'm stressed. And it says, well, ABC, do this, rather than really trying to find out more about why somebody's stressed. But to really, I don't think that AI is going to take over the counseling world. I think it's going to provide some ancillary methods, but we have to remember too, AI is coming from professionals. AI learns from us, but we work alongside it. So no, I don't think we need to throw all the digital tools out, like bathwater, but we can find which ones, actually can assist in helping people grow.
That's well said. It's interesting when I get into this discussion is I'm just old enough in which I remember mentors of mine who came up before me in the 80s. There was a big move in the therapy space to start utilizing workbooks for pain management and CBT. And there was a huge outrage How can you teach anybody? You need to work this through in face-to-face therapy. You can't give people workbooks. Well, that was the AI version of codifying certain. Now, I'm not saying AI is simply an algorithmic or workbook. I'm not. But I mean, there was that level of outrage that, oh my God, you cannot do this. And so I love how you have a very even keel approach of it is another tool in the toolbox that we need to use in conjunction with continuing to provide these array of services under an EAP umbrella. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah. Have that human touch
Yes.
still. It needs still a human involvement to some degree.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Thrive with R3.
R3 is a workplace behavioral health pioneer and innovator, providing rapid response and ongoing behavioral health solutions that help people and organizations recover, perform, and thrive in the wake of disruption and stress.
For more episodes, insights, and resources, visit thrivewithr3.com.